The blood on her dress had dried to a rust-brown stain that spread across her left side like spilled wine, and when she knocked on the door of the cabin at the edge of White River, South Dakota, her knuckles left red smears on the weathered wood. Wyatt Sullivan had been cleaning his rifle when he heard the knock, a sound so unexpected in the fading light of the August evening in 1878 that at first he thought it might be a branch scraping against the door. But then it came again, weaker this time, more urgent, and he set the Winchester aside and crossed the rough-hewn floor in 3 long strides. The woman on his porch swayed like a willow in a storm, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her face pale as moonlight. She held a folded piece of parchment in one hand and pressed the other against her side, where blood seeped between her fingers. Her eyes were the color of spring grass, bright with pain and determination in equal measure. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need help." Wyatt caught her as she fell forward, the parchment fluttering to the ground as she lost her grip. He swept her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was despite her height, and kicked the door shut behind him. The cabin was small but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in one corner, and a table with 2 chairs near the window. He carried her to the bed and laid her down carefully, then grabbed the lamp from the table and brought it closer. "Where are you shot?" he asked, his hands already working at the buttons of her blood-soaked traveling dress. "Left side," she managed through gritted teeth. "Below the ribs. I think it went through." He had seen enough bullet wounds in his 30 years to know that she was right. The entry wound was small and clean, just above her hip bone, and when he carefully rolled her onto her right side, he could see the larger exit wound on her back. That was good news. The bullet had not lodged inside her, which meant no digging around with a knife or forceps, no risk of missing a fragment that could fester and kill her. "You are lucky," he said, reaching for the clean rags he kept in a trunk at the foot of the bed. "Whoever shot you missed everything important." "Lucky," she repeated with a bitter laugh that turned into a gasp of pain. "That is not the word I would use." Wyatt worked quickly, cleaning the wounds with whiskey that made her cry out and arch off the bed, then packing them with clean cloth and binding her torso with long strips of torn linen. His hands were steady and sure, neither lingering nor rough, and when he was finished he pulled a blanket over her and stepped back. "You will live," he said, "but you need rest and water and food when you can keep it down. Who shot you?" The woman's eyes had drifted closed, but they opened at his question, focusing on his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. She studied him in the lamplight, taking in his dark hair that brushed his collar, his angular features, the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his temple. He wore a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, canvas trousers, and boots that had seen better days. There was nothing remarkable about him, nothing that suggested he was anything more than what he appeared to be, a man living alone in a cabin at the edge of a small Dakota town. "The Garrett brothers," she said finally. "Cole and Jesse Garrett. They were guiding me to the Black Hills, but they decided it would be easier to just shoot me and take the map." "Map?" She tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face. "The map. I dropped it when I will get it," Wyatt said, putting a hand on her shoulder to keep her still. "Stay down or you will start bleeding again." He found the parchment just inside the door where it had fallen, picked it up, and carried it back to the bed. The woman reached for it with trembling fingers, but he held it out of reach, unfolding it to look at what was worth killing for. The map was hand-drawn but detailed, showing a section of the Black Hills with various landmarks marked, a split pine, a creek that forked, a rock formation that looked like a bird. And there in the center was an X marked in red ink with a single word written beside it. Gold. Your father was a prospector, Wyatt said, not asking but stating. The woman's eyes widened. How did you know? The handwriting, old and shaky, and no professional surveyor would mark a gold claim like this. This is personal, family, she nodded slowly. My father, Victor Ellis. He died 3 months ago in a mining accident in Deadwood. But before he died, he gave this map to a friend who promised to bring it to me in Omaha. The friend said my father had found something big, something that would make me rich enough to live the rest of my life in comfort. But I had to come and claim it myself. So you came all the way from Nebraska to South Dakota chasing gold. I came all the way from Omaha chasing a future, she corrected him, her voice fierce despite her weakness. I have nothing. My father sent money when he could, but after he died, there was nothing. No savings, no property, nothing but debts and his landlord waiting to collect. This map was my only chance. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment, then folded the map and set it on the small table beside the bed. What is your name, Violet? She said. Violet Ellis, Wyatt Sullivan. And you are going to stay right here in this bed until you are strong enough to stand without falling over. Then we will talk about gold. But the Garrett brothers will not come looking for you here. They think you are dead somewhere between here and wherever they shot you. How did you get away? Violet's lips curved into a faint smile. I fell off my horse when they shot me, and I rolled down a ravine into a creek. The water was shallow but fast, and it carried me downstream. I heard them arguing about whether to go after me, but it was getting dark and they were more interested in the map. They must have thought it fell into the creek with me. You hid it in my corset. When I climbed out of the creek, I walked through the night until I saw your cabin. I thought about going into town, but I was afraid the Garrett brothers might be there, and I did not know who I could trust. Wyatt crossed to the fireplace and added wood to the dying coals, building up the flames until the room filled with warmth and light. You can trust me, he said without turning around. I do not shoot women or steal maps. Why not? Violet asked, and there was something challenging in her voice, something that made him turn to look at her. You are a cowboy living alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. How do I know you are not just waiting for me to fall asleep so you can take the map for yourself? Because if I wanted the map, I would already have it, Wyatt said simply. You are in no condition to stop me, but I do not want it. I have no interest in gold or prospecting or anything that takes me into the Black Hills. Why not? He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Because gold makes men crazy. It makes them betray friends, kill strangers, abandon families. I have seen what it does, and I want no part of it. Violet was silent, watching him in the firelight. He was tall and lean, built like a man who spent his days in a saddle or working a ranch, and there was a hardness to him that suggested he had lived through things he did not talk about. But there was also a gentleness in the way he had tended her wounds, a carefulness that spoke of someone who understood suffering and wanted to ease it. Then why help me? She asked quietly. Wyatt turned from the fire to look at her. Because you needed help. That is reason enough. Over the next 3 days, Violet drifted in and out of fever, her body fighting the shock and blood loss. Wyatt tended her with the same steady patience he showed everything, bringing her water when she was thirsty, broth when she could swallow, cool cloths for her forehead when the fever burned too hot. He changed her bandages twice a day, monitoring the wounds for signs of infection, and was relieved to see them beginning to close cleanly. When she was lucid, they talked. Violet told him about growing up in Omaha, the daughter of a dreamer who was always certain the next claim would be the big one. She told him about her mother, who had died of consumption when Violet was 12, and how her father had left for the Black Hills 2 years later, promising to send for her when he struck it rich. He never did, she said, staring at the rough beams of the cabin ceiling. Strike it rich, I mean. He sent enough money for me to rent a room and work as a seamstress, but it was never enough for more than that. And then the money stopped coming and I found out he was dead. I am sorry, Wyatt said, and meant it. Do not be. He chose gold over me a long time ago. I am just trying to make something from what he left behind. Wyatt told her about his own past, though he kept the details sparse. He had been a ranch hand in Texas, then a drover on cattle runs to Kansas, then a scout for the Army. He had come to South Dakota 2 years ago, built this cabin on land he had purchased with his savings, and had been raising horses ever since. Why here? Violet asked. Why South Dakota? Because it is quiet, because people leave you alone. Because I was tired of moving and wanted to put down roots somewhere. Are you running from something? He looked at her sharply, but there was no judgment in her eyes, only curiosity. No, he said. I am running towards something. Peace, maybe. Or just the chance to wake up each morning and not wonder if today is the day I die. On the 4th day, Violet was strong enough to sit up and eat a full meal of beans and cornbread. The color had returned to her cheeks, and though she still moved carefully, favoring her left side, the worst was clearly over. Wyatt was cooking dinner when she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, testing her weight. Easy, he said, turning from the stove. You are not ready to run a race yet. I am ready to walk across the room, Violet said, and proved it by taking slow, deliberate steps to the table. She sat down heavily in one of the chairs and smiled in triumph. See, you are stubborn. I am determined. There is a difference. Wyatt brought 2 plates to the table and sat across from her. They ate in companionable silence for a while, and then Violet said, I need to get to that gold claim. I know. Will you take me? He looked up from his plate, meeting her eyes. They were clear and bright, no longer clouded with pain, and there was a strength in them that he found himself admiring. The Black Hills are dangerous, he said. The Lakota are fighting to keep prospectors out, and they have every right to. That is their land, promised to them by treaty. And even if we avoid them, there are men like the Garrett brothers everywhere, all of them willing to kill for a chance at gold. I know the risks, Violet said, but I have to try. This is my only chance to have something, to be something more than a seamstress working for pennies and living in a rented room. Please, Wyatt, I will pay you. Once I find the gold, I will give you a share. I told you I do not want gold. Then what do you want? The question hung in the air between them. Wyatt looked at her, this woman who had stumbled into his life with a map and a bullet wound, who should have died but had fought her way to survival through sheer will. He thought about the emptiness of his cabin when he was alone, the silence that stretched through the long winter nights, the way he sometimes went days without speaking to another person. I want you to heal properly, he said finally. And I want to make sure you do not get yourself killed chasing a dream. Is that a yes? That is a maybe. Let me think about it. But even as he said it, Wyatt knew he had already made his decision. There was something about Violet that called to him, something that made the cabin feel less empty and the future seem less lonely. He told himself it was just because she needed help, that any decent man would do the same. But late that night, lying on the floor by the fire while she slept in his bed, he admitted to himself that it was more than that. 2 more days passed before Wyatt declared Violet well enough to travel. He spent the time preparing, checking his supplies, cleaning his guns, and studying the map she had shown him. He knew the Black Hills, had scouted there for the Army before the gold rush turned the region into a powder keg. The landmarks on the map were familiar to him, and he thought he could find the location marked with the X, assuming it was accurate. We will need to go through White River to get supplies, he told Violet on the morning they were set to leave. "But we need to be careful. If the Garrett brothers are still around, they might recognize you." "They think I am dead," Violet said, strapping on the gun belt Wyatt had given her. The Colt revolver sat heavy on her hip, and she rested her hand on it experimentally. "And even if they do not, I am not the same woman they shot. I was wearing a blue traveling dress, and my hair was pinned up. Now I am wearing trousers and a shirt, and my hair is in a braid." Wyatt had to admit she was right. Dressed in clothes he had modified to fit her, her long hair plaited down her back, she looked more like a young ranch hand than a woman from Omaha. The transformation was startling, and he found himself staring longer than he should have. "What?" Violet asked, catching his look. "Nothing. You just look different." "Good. That is the point." They rode into White River in the late morning, with Wyatt on his bay gelding and Violet on a smaller buckskin mare he had been training. The town was not much to look at, just a handful of buildings clustered along the main street. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a hotel, and a small church. But it was busy, filled with prospectors heading to or from the Black Hills, soldiers from Fort Robinson, and the Lakota people who still came to trade despite the tensions. Wyatt tied the horses outside the general store and went inside with Violet following. The proprietor, a middle-aged man named Henry Shaw, looked up from behind the counter and nodded in greeting. "Wyatt, good to see you. What can I do for you? Need supplies for a week or so? Flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, ammunition." Henry started gathering the items, and Violet wandered the store, looking at the shelves stocked with everything from fabric to tools to patent medicines. She stopped in front of a display of hats and picked up a wide-brimmed Stetson, trying it on. "Suits you," Wyatt said, coming up beside her. "You think so? Better than no hat at all. You will need it where we are going." Violet studied herself in the small mirror on the wall, turning her head from side to side. The hat shadowed her face, making her eyes seem larger, and there was something about the way she wore it that made her look both vulnerable and fierce. "I will take it," she said. As they were loading their purchases into saddlebags outside, a voice called out from across the street. "Well, if it is not Wyatt Sullivan, where have you been hiding yourself, cowboy?" Wyatt looked up to see a tall man with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest walking toward them. Tom Reeves was a good man, honest and fair, and one of the few people in White River that Wyatt counted as a friend. "Just keeping to myself, Tom. You know how it is." "I do." Tom's eyes shifted to Violet, and his expression grew curious. "Who is your friend?" "This is my cousin, Victor," Wyatt said smoothly. "He is helping me move some horses up to Fort Robinson." Violet had the presence of mind to duck her head and touch the brim of her new hat in greeting, keeping her voice low. "Marshal." "Victor," Tom said, nodding. "Welcome to White River. You watch yourself out there. We have had some trouble lately with bandits on the roads. A couple of prospectors got robbed last week and one of them got shot." "We will be careful," Wyatt said. "Thanks for the warning." As Tom walked away, Violet let out a breath she had been holding. That was close. He did not suspect anything. "Come on, let us get out of town before our luck runs out." They rode north, following a trail that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with scrub, pine, and juniper. The August sun beat down mercilessly, and Wyatt was glad he had insisted Violet take the hat. They rode in silence for the most part, saving their breath for the heat and the distance, stopping only to water the horses at a creek and eat a quick lunch of jerky and hardtack. As the afternoon wore on and the grasslands began to give way to rougher terrain, Wyatt found himself watching Violet more than he watched the trail. She sat the horse well, her back straight despite the pain that still lingered in her side, and she scanned the horizon with an alertness that suggested she was no stranger to danger. There was something magnetic about her, something that drew his eye again and again, and he had to force himself to focus on the path ahead. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow beneath a stand of cottonwoods, building a small fire to boil coffee and heat up beans. The stars came out in a brilliant sweep across the sky, more stars than Violet had ever seen in Omaha, and she sat with her back against a rock and her coffee cup warming her hands, staring up in wonder. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is," Wyatt agreed, but he was looking at her when he said it. "You ever get lonely out here, just you and the sky and nothing else for miles?" He considered the question. "Sometimes, but there are worse things than loneliness." "Like what?" "Like being surrounded by people and still feeling alone." Violet turned to look at him, the firelight casting shadows across her face. "You have felt that way, haven't you?" She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, in Omaha after my father left. I had a room in a boarding house with 6 other women, but none of them were really friends. We were all just trying to survive, and there was no room for anything else. I used to lie awake at night listening to them breathe and snore and cry in their sleep, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life." "Is that why you came here? To chase the gold?" "I came here because I had nothing left to lose. And maybe because I hoped that out here in all this space I could find something true, something real." "Have you?" She met his eyes across the fire. "I am starting to think I might have." They sat in silence after that, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people understand each other without needing words, and Wyatt felt something shift inside him, some wall he had built around himself beginning to crack. The next day they crossed into the Black Hills, following the map's landmarks. The landscape changed dramatically, the open grasslands giving way to steep pine-covered ridges and narrow valleys cut by fast-flowing streams. It was beautiful and wild, and Wyatt understood why the Lakota fought so hard to keep it. This was sacred land, and the presence of prospectors with their picks and sluices and greed felt like a violation. They saw evidence of mining everywhere: abandoned claims, scarred hillsides, muddy streams choked with tailings. And they saw prospectors too, lone men and small groups, all of them looking hungry and desperate. Wyatt kept his hand near his rifle and his eyes open, and Violet did the same. On the 3rd day out from White River, they found the split pine marked on the map, a massive tree that had been struck by lightning and divided into 2 trunks that grew in opposite directions. From there, they followed the creek that forked, and then climbed a ridge to look for the rock formation that looked like a bird. "There," Violet said, pointing. "Do you see it? The way those rocks jut out, it looks like a bird's head and beak." Wyatt saw it too, and he felt a surge of reluctant excitement. They were close. According to the map, the claim was just beyond the rock formation, in a small canyon that ran east to west. They found it an hour later, a narrow canyon with steep walls and a stream running through the bottom. The remains of a rough camp were still visible. A circle of stones for a fire, a lean-to made of branches and canvas, tools scattered about. And there, half hidden by brush, was the entrance to a mine shaft. Violet dismounted and walked to the entrance, her hand trembling as she touched the rough timbers that framed the opening. "My father dug this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He was here. He stood right here." Wyatt came up beside her, carrying a lantern he had lit. "Let me go in first." "Make sure it is safe." "I am coming with you." He wanted to argue, but the look on her face stopped him. This was her father's legacy, her future, and she had every right to be part of it. "All right, but stay close and watch your step. Mine shafts can collapse without warning." They entered the shaft together, the lantern light pushing back the darkness. The shaft went straight for about 20 feet, then turned and descended at an angle. The air was cool and damp, smelling of earth and stone, and water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead. Wyatt moved carefully, testing each step, and Violet followed with one hand on his shoulder. The shaft opened into a small chamber, maybe 10 feet across, and Wyatt raised the lantern to illuminate the walls. What he saw made him draw in a sharp breath. Gold. Not just traces or flecks, but a thick vein of it running through the quartz like honey through bread. It was the kind of strike that prospectors dreamed about, the kind that could make a person rich beyond imagining. "Oh my God," Violet whispered. "It is real. It is actually real." "Your father found something, all right," Wyatt said. "This is a fortune." Violet reached out and touched the vein, her fingers tracing the gold's gleaming surface. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no effort to wipe them away. He did it. After all those years, all those failures, he finally did it. "And he wanted you to have it," Wyatt said gently. "That is why he made the map. That is why he sent it to you." They stood together in the golden light of the lantern, and Wyatt felt the weight of what they had found settling over them. This changed everything. Violet would not need to work as a seamstress anymore, would not need to worry about money or security. She could go anywhere, do anything. She could leave South Dakota and never look back. The thought filled him with an unexpected sadness. They spent the rest of the day securing the claim and setting up a proper camp. Wyatt showed Violet how to file the corners and mark the boundaries, how to post the notice that would make her legal claim official. It was work that would need to be registered in Deadwood, but for now, it was enough to establish her presence. That night, sitting by the fire with the canyon walls rising around them, Violet said, "I could not have done this without you." "You would have found a way," Wyatt said. "You are too stubborn to fail. I am serious. If you had not helped me, I would be dead. The Garrett brothers would have killed me, or the bullet wound would have, or I would have died trying to find this place on my own. You saved my life, Wyatt, more than once. You do not owe me anything. I owe you everything." She moved closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body in the cool night air. "And I want to give you half of this claim. It is only fair." "No, Wyatt, I did not help you for gold," he said firmly. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Because you needed help and I could give it. Taking half your claim would make me no better than the men who shot you. That is not true, and you know it. You earned this." "What I earned," Wyatt said, turning to look at her, "was the chance to know you, and that is payment enough." Violet stared at him, her eyes wide in the firelight. "You mean that?" "Every word." She leaned forward and kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative, and when she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I have wanted to do that since the day I woke up in your cabin and saw you making breakfast." Wyatt felt his heart hammering in his chest. "I have wanted to do this since the moment I caught you on my porch." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her again, deeper this time, and she melted against him with a sigh that seemed to come from her very soul. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, and when they finally drew apart, Wyatt said, "This gold is going to change your life. You could go anywhere, do anything. Why would you want to tie yourself to a cowboy living in a cabin in South Dakota?" "Because that cowboy is kind and brave and good," Violet said. "Because he put my life ahead of his own comfort and safety. Because when I look at him, I see the future I want, not the one I thought I needed." "Violet, I love you," she said simply. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a little more than a week, but I love you. And if you do not feel the same way, that is all right, but I needed you to know." Wyatt looked at her, this woman who had come to him wounded and desperate, and had somehow become the most important thing in his world. "I love you too," he said, and the words felt like a release, like something he had been holding back for too long finally breaking free. "I love you and I want you to stay. Not just here, not just for the gold, but with me. For as long as you will have me." Violet laughed and cried at the same time and kissed him again, and for a while there was no gold, no canyon, no world beyond the circle of firelight and the two of them in it. The next morning, they were awakened by the sound of voices and the scrape of boots on stone. Wyatt was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, and Violet scrambled up beside him, reaching for the revolver on her hip. 3 men stood at the entrance to the canyon, all of them armed, all of them looking at the camp with hard, appraising eyes. Wyatt recognized 2 of them immediately from Violet's description: the Garrett brothers, Cole and Jesse. The third man was older, with a scar across his face and the look of someone who had killed before and would do so again without hesitation. "Well, well," Cole Garrett said, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Looks like that Ellis woman did not die after all. And she found the gold just like we thought she would." "This claim is filed and legal," Wyatt said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You have no right to be here." "We have every right," Jesse Garrett said. "We were guiding her, remember? That means we are entitled to a share. And if she does not want to give it to us, well, we will just have to take it." The third man, the one with the scar, spoke up. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be, friend. Give us the claim and walk away. You live, she lives, everybody is happy." "Except us," Violet said, stepping forward. "You shot me and left me for dead, you stole my map, and now you want my gold. You are not getting any of it." Cole Garrett laughed. "You got spirit, girl, I will give you that, but spirit does not stop bullets." "Neither does arrogance," Wyatt said, and his rifle came up in a smooth, practiced motion, the barrel leveling at Cole's chest. "You want to draw, go ahead, but I promise you at least one of you will be dead before you clear leather." The canyon fell silent except for the sound of the stream and the wind in the pines. The 3 men looked at Wyatt, at the steadiness of his hands and the coldness in his eyes, and whatever they saw there made them reconsider. "This is not over," Cole Garrett said finally, backing toward the canyon entrance. "You cannot stay here forever. Sooner or later you will have to leave, and when you do, we will be waiting." "We will take our chances," Wyatt said. The 3 men retreated, but Wyatt knew they would not go far. They had seen the gold, knew what it was worth, and men like that did not give up easily. He lowered the rifle but did not put it down, and Violet came to stand beside him. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. "We go to Deadwood and file this claim properly. Once it is registered with the mining office, it will be harder for them to contest it, and we need to get a marshal involved, report what happened to you. That is 2 days' ride. I know, but we do not have a choice. We cannot defend this place forever, and we cannot work the claim if we are constantly looking over our shoulders." Violet nodded, understanding. "When do we leave?" "Now. Pack light and fast. We will come back for the rest later." They broke camp quickly, taking only what they could carry on the horses. Wyatt kept watch the whole time, expecting an ambush at any moment, but the Garrett brothers and their companions stayed out of sight. That worried him more than if they had attacked. It meant they were planning something, waiting for the right moment. They rode out of the canyon at a fast trot, heading northeast toward Deadwood. The trail was rough, winding through dense forest and across steep ridges, and Wyatt pushed them hard, wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and the claim. They were halfway up a particularly steep climb when the shot rang out, echoing off the rocks. Wyatt felt the bullet pass close enough to his head that he heard it whistle, and then he was yelling at Violet to ride, spurring his horse forward as more shots cracked behind them. They crested the ridge at a gallop and plunged down the other side, branches whipping at their faces, the horses scrambling for footing on the loose scree. Behind them, Wyatt could hear the pursuit, the shouts of the Garrett brothers and the pounding of hooves. "Keep going," he shouted to Violet, and then he was reining in his horse, wheeling around, bringing the rifle to his shoulder. He did not want to kill anyone, but he would not let them hurt Violet. Not again. He fired 3 quick shots, aiming high, and had the satisfaction of seeing one of the pursuers duck and fall back. But the others kept coming, and Wyatt knew he could not hold them off alone. He spurred his horse forward again, catching up to Violet as she navigated a narrow defile between 2 rock outcroppings. "There," she shouted, pointing. A cave, he saw it, a dark opening in the rock face just off the trail, and he nodded. "Go, I will cover you." Violet dismounted in a sliding rush and ran for the cave, leading her horse. Wyatt followed, firing back over his shoulder to keep the Garrett brothers at bay. They made it inside just as another volley of shots ricocheted off the rocks, and Wyatt pulled a dead tree across the entrance as an improvised barricade. The cave was shallow but deep enough to offer cover, and Wyatt positioned himself at the entrance with his rifle while Violet checked the horses for injuries. Miraculously, none of them had been hit. "How much ammunition do you have?" Violet asked, coming to kneel beside him. "Enough. You?" "The revolver is fully loaded." "Good. Save it unless they get close." They waited, watching the trail outside, but the Garrett brothers did not immediately attack. Instead, they took up positions in the rocks above the cave, close enough that Wyatt could hear them talking but too far away for a clear shot. "You cannot stay in there forever," Cole Garrett shouted. "We will wait you out if we have to. We have water and supplies." Wyatt shouted back, which was a lie but sounded convincing. "How long can you wait?" There was silence, and then Jesse Garrett called out, "We do not have to wait. We can just smoke you out." Wyatt swore under his breath. He had not considered that, and a quick glance at the cave's interior confirmed his fear. There was no other exit. If they started a fire at the entrance, the smoke would fill the cave in minutes, and they would be forced to come out or suffocate. "We need to make a run for it," he said to Violet, "before they have a chance to gather enough wood for a fire. That is suicide. They will shoot us the moment we step outside. Maybe, but it is better than dying in here." Violet looked at him, her green eyes fierce. "There has to be another way. If there is, I cannot see it." "Then we fight. Together. If we are going to die, we do it fighting." Wyatt felt a swell of pride and love so strong it almost overwhelmed him. This woman, this incredible, stubborn, brave woman, was willing to stand with him against impossible odds, and he knew in that moment that no matter what happened, he would never regret meeting her. "All right," he said. "We fight." But before they could put together a plan, a new sound echoed through the forest. Hoofbeats, many of them, coming fast. Wyatt risked a look around the barricade and saw a group of riders emerging from the trees, at least a dozen of them, all wearing the uniforms of the United States Cavalry. Leading them was Tom Reeves, the marshal from White River, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "Cole Garrett, Jesse Garrett." Tom's voice boomed across the rocks. "You are under arrest for robbery and attempted murder. Put down your weapons and come down from there." For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a flurry of activity in the rocks above, and Wyatt heard the Garrett brothers arguing in harsh whispers. A shot rang out, fired toward the soldiers, and Tom shouted, "Return fire." The soldiers opened up with their rifles, a coordinated volley that sent bullets ricocheting off the rocks and splintering trees. There was a cry of pain, and then the sound of someone crashing through the brush, running. The soldiers gave chase, and within minutes it was over. Cole and Jesse Garrett were captured, and the third man, the one with the scar, was dead from a soldier's bullet. Tom dismounted and walked to the cave entrance, looking in at Wyatt and Violet with a wry smile. "You two all right?" "We are now," Wyatt said, lowering his rifle. "How did you find us?" "After you left White River, I got to thinking about your cousin Victor. Something about him did not sit right. And then I remembered the report about a woman being shot by her guides and left for dead. I put two and two together and figured you might be in trouble. Good thing I asked Fort Robinson for some backup." Violet stepped forward, no longer hiding her identity. "Thank you, Marshal. You saved our lives." Tom tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, miss. Though I would appreciate it if next time you need help, you ask for it straight instead of pretending to be someone's cousin." "There will not be a next time," Violet said. "I promise." With the Garrett brothers in custody and an armed escort, Wyatt and Violet made the rest of the journey to Deadwood without incident. The town was as wild and chaotic as Wyatt remembered, a sprawling collection of tents and rough buildings clinging to the sides of a narrow gulch. The streets were rivers of mud, and the air was thick with the sounds of hammers and saws and shouting. They filed Violet's claim at the mining office, a process that took most of a day but resulted in an official document bearing her name and the legal description of her property. The clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, congratulated her and warned her to hire guards if she intended to work the claim herself. "Gold brings out the worst in people," he said. "You cannot be too careful." From the mining office, they went to the marshal's station, where Violet gave a full statement about the Garrett brothers and what they had done. The marshal, a grizzled veteran named Seth Bullock, assured her that Cole and Jesse would face trial and likely spend years in prison. "And the third man?" Violet asked. "The one who was killed?" "Turned out he was wanted for murder in 3 territories," Bullock said. "You did the world a favor by leading us to him." That night they took rooms at a hotel, the first real beds either of them had slept in for more than a week. Wyatt lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, he had been alone in his cabin, content with his solitude. Now, his life had been turned upside down by a woman with a map and a bullet wound, and he could not imagine going back to the way things were. The next morning, Violet came to his room and knocked on the door. When he opened it, she was standing there in a new dress, her hair brushed and shining, and she looked more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the gold and what it means. And I do not want to work the claim, not really. I do not want to spend the rest of my life digging in the dirt and looking over my shoulder. But I do want to sell it. There are companies in Deadwood that buy claims, and they will pay a fair price. Not as much as I could make if I worked it myself, but enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life." "That is smart," Wyatt said, "and safe. And then I want to go back to White River with you. I want to help you raise horses and build a life together, if you will have me." Wyatt felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Are you sure? You could go anywhere, do anything. Why tie yourself to a cowboy in South Dakota?" "Because I love the cowboy," Violet said simply. "And because South Dakota is starting to feel like home." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and in that moment, Wyatt Sullivan knew that he was the luckiest man alive. They spent another week in Deadwood, negotiating with mining companies and settling Violet's affairs. In the end, she sold the claim to a reputable outfit for a sum that made Wyatt's head spin. It was enough money to buy land, build a house, start a real ranch. It was enough money to secure their future. With the sale complete and the money deposited in a bank in Cheyenne, they rode back to White River together, taking their time and enjoying the journey. The landscape seemed different now, less harsh and more beautiful, and Wyatt found himself looking at it through new eyes. When they reached his cabin, Wyatt reined in his horse and looked at the rough structure with a critical eye. "It is not much," he said, "but we can add on to it, build a proper house." "I like it," Violet said. "It is where you brought me when I needed help. It is where I started to fall in love with you. Why would I want to change it? Because you deserve better. I have better. I have you." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in White River, with Tom Reeves standing up as best man and a handful of townspeople in attendance. Violet wore a simple white dress she had bought in Deadwood, and Wyatt wore his best shirt and a new pair of trousers. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed Violet like it was the first and last kiss he would ever give. They spent the winter building a new house on Wyatt's land, a sturdy structure with 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a stone fireplace that kept the rooms warm even during the worst blizzards. Violet proved to be handy with a hammer and saw, and together they turned the empty plot into a home. In the spring, they bought more horses and started breeding them, building a reputation for quality stock that spread throughout the territory. Wyatt handled the training and Violet managed the business side, and together they made the ranch prosper. Their first child, a son they named Samuel, was born in the fall of 1879, delivered by a midwife from White River with Wyatt pacing anxiously outside. When he was finally allowed in and saw Violet holding their baby, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy, he felt tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Violet whispered, "just like his father. He is perfect like his mother," Wyatt corrected, kissing her forehead. "You are amazing." 2 years later, a daughter named Grace joined the family, and then another son, Thomas, 3 years after that. The house filled with noise and laughter, and the chaos of children, and Wyatt found himself busier and happier than he had ever imagined possible. Through it all, his love for Violet only deepened. She was his partner in every sense of the word, working beside him during the day and holding him close at night. She was strong and smart and funny, and she had a way of making even the hardest days seem bearable. They had their struggles, of course. There were years when the horses did not sell as well as they hoped, years when drought made the grass scarce and the work harder. But they faced every challenge together, and they always came through stronger on the other side. On their 10th anniversary, Wyatt took Violet back to the canyon where they had found her father's gold claim. The mine had long since been worked out by the company that bought it, but the canyon itself was unchanged, still wild and beautiful. They stood together at the entrance to the shaft, holding hands, and Violet said, "Do you ever regret not taking half the claim when I offered it?" "Never," Wyatt said. "The only thing I wanted from that canyon was you, and I got you." "We got each other," Violet corrected. "And I would not change a single moment, not even the bullet wound." "Especially not the bullet wound," Wyatt said with a grin. "If you had not been shot, you would never have come to my door. And if you had not been the kind of man who would put my life before gold, I would never have fallen in love with you." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Their children were waiting for them. Samuel, now 11 and already tall like his father, Grace 9 and full of energy, Thomas 6 and always getting into mischief. The house glowed with lamplight, and smoke rose from the chimney into the evening sky. Wyatt helped Violet down from her horse and pulled her close, kissing her in the fading light. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For coming to my door, for trusting me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for saying gold can wait," Violet said, smiling up at him. "You saved my life that day, but you also gave me a reason to live it." They walked to the house together, hand in hand, and as they stepped inside, surrounded by the warmth and noise of their family, Wyatt thought about the man he had been 10 years ago. Alone in a cabin, living a quiet life, content with his solitude. That man would never have believed he could be this happy, this fulfilled. But then a woman had come to his door with a map and a bullet wound, and everything had changed. She had brought chaos and danger and love into his life, and he would be forever grateful. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Samuel grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and eventually courting a girl from a neighboring spread. Grace proved to have her mother's head for business and started keeping the ranch's books when she was just 14. Thomas inherited his father's way with horses and could gentle even the wildest colt. Wyatt and Violet watched their children grow with pride and a touch of melancholy, knowing that soon they would be leaving to start families of their own. But for now, they were all together, a unit forged from love and hardship, and the kind of bond that only comes from facing life's trials side by side. On a warm summer evening in 1895, when Wyatt was 47 and Violet 43, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant hills in gold and purple. Their children were inside preparing dinner, and the sounds of their laughter and conversation drifted through the open windows. "You remember the night we met?" Violet asked, her head resting on Wyatt's shoulder. "Every detail," Wyatt said. "The way you swayed on the porch, the blood on your dress, the determination in your eyes even though you were dying. I was so scared, but when you opened that door and caught me, I knew somehow that everything would be all right." "I should have been more scared than I was," Wyatt admitted. "Taking in a wounded stranger with people trying to kill her. But all I could think about was making sure you lived." "Why?" Violet asked. Even though she knew the answer, it was a question they had asked each other many times over the years, a ritual that reaffirmed what they meant to each other. "Because gold can wait," Wyatt said softly. "But you could not. And I could not imagine a world where I let you die on my porch without at least trying to save you. And I could not imagine a world where I did not fall in love with the man who saved me," Violet said, lifting her head to kiss him. "You gave me everything, Wyatt. A home, a family, a life worth living." "You gave me the same," Wyatt said. "Before you came along, I was just existing. You taught me how to live." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. From inside the house, Samuel called out that dinner was ready, and Wyatt stood, offering his hand to Violet. "Shall we?" he said with a smile. "We shall," Violet replied, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. As they walked inside together, Wyatt reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. He had been a ranch hand, a drover, a scout, and a cowboy, always moving, never settling. And then a woman with green eyes and a bullet wound had stumbled into his life, and he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. A place to call home and someone to share it with. The gold in the Black Hills had been impressive, a fortune that most men would kill for. But Wyatt had been right all those years ago when he told Violet that gold made men crazy. He had seen what the pursuit of wealth could do to people, how it twisted them, and made them forget what was truly important. He had chosen differently. When faced with the choice between gold and Violet, he had chosen her without hesitation. And that single decision had given him everything he could have wanted: love, family, purpose, and a life rich in all the ways that mattered. As the family gathered around the table and Samuel said grace, Wyatt looked at each of their faces in turn. Samuel, so serious and responsible; Grace, quick-witted and clever; Thomas, gentle and kind; and Violet, his wife, his partner, his heart. They were his fortune, more valuable than any gold vein in the earth, and he would spend the rest of his life being grateful that fate had brought Violet to his door that August evening so long ago. After dinner, as the children cleaned up and prepared for bed, Wyatt and Violet returned to the porch. The night was clear and cool, the kind of night that made you glad to be alive. They sat close together on the bench Wyatt had built years ago, and Violet pulled a shawl around her shoulders. "I was thinking," she said, "we should visit Deadwood one more time, see what has become of the place, maybe visit the claim site." "It has been years since we were there," Wyatt said. "I imagine it has changed quite a bit." "Everything changes," Violet said, "but some things stay the same." "Like us." "Like us," Wyatt agreed, kissing the top of her head. "I want our children to see where it all started. I want them to understand that the life we have built came from something difficult and dangerous, but also something wonderful. I want them to know that their father chose love over gold, and that made all the difference." "When should we go?" "Next summer, maybe. After the spring foals are weaned and before the fall sale, we could make a family trip of it." "I like that idea," Wyatt said. "It would be good for them to see more of the territory." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands and watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. The night sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Horses moving in the pasture, a dog barking in the distance, the rustle of wind through the grass. It was a symphony Wyatt had heard thousands of times, but it never grew old. Each night was a gift, each moment with Violet precious. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had not come to your door?" Violet asked suddenly. "Sometimes," Wyatt admitted. "I think I would have stayed in that cabin, raising horses and keeping to myself. Maybe I would have been content in a way. But I would never have known what I was missing. I would never have known this kind of happiness. And I would probably be dead," Violet said matter-of-factly. "Or if not dead, then living in some city somewhere, working as a seamstress and dreaming about what might have been. I would never have known love like this. I would never have had children. I would never have felt truly alive." "We are lucky," Wyatt said. "We are blessed," Violet corrected. "Luck is random. This feels like something more, like we were meant to find each other." "Maybe we were," Wyatt said. "Maybe every hard thing I went through, every mile I traveled, every choice I made, it was all leading me to that moment when you knocked on my door. And maybe every disappointment and heartbreak I experienced was preparing me to recognize a good man when I found him," Violet said. "To not take for granted what we have." They fell silent again, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. After 17 years of marriage, they did not always need words to communicate. They understood each other at a level that went beyond language, a connection forged through shared experiences and deep, abiding love. Eventually, the chill in the air drove them inside. They checked on the children, all three of them asleep in their beds, and then retired to their own room. As Wyatt lay in bed with Violet curled against him, her breathing slow and steady, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. This was enough. This was everything. The ranch would continue to prosper or struggle depending on the whims of weather and market. The children would grow and leave and start their own families, and he and Violet would grow old together. But whatever came, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Wyatt and Violet worked side by side, their partnership as strong as it had been from the beginning. They trained horses, managed the business, raised their children, and built a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary. The following summer, true to their word, they made the journey to Deadwood with the whole family. The town had changed dramatically in the 16 years since Wyatt and Violet had last visited. It was no longer the wild, chaotic mining camp it had been, but a proper city with brick buildings, paved streets, and even electricity in some areas. They visited the mining office where Violet had filed her claim and found that the clerk who had helped them had long since retired. The new clerk looked up the record and confirmed that the claim had been fully worked out years ago, yielding over $100,000 worth of gold to the company that purchased it. "Your father knew what he was doing," the clerk told Violet. "That was one of the richest strikes in the Black Hills. He would be proud to know it provided for his daughter," Violet said, squeezing Wyatt's hand. From Deadwood, they rode out to the canyon. The entrance was now marked with a rusted sign warning of unstable conditions, and the mine shaft itself had been sealed with timbers and rock. But the canyon was still beautiful, the stream still flowing, the pine trees still whispering in the wind. Samuel, Grace, and Thomas explored the area while Wyatt and Violet stood together at the spot where they had camped all those years ago. "It looks smaller than I remember," Violet said. "Everything does when you come back years later," Wyatt replied. "But what happened here, that is still as big as ever." "You saved my life here," Violet said. "More than once. And you saved mine, even if you did not realize it. You gave me a reason to be something more than just a man living alone in a cabin." They called the children back, and together the family made their way out of the canyon. That night, camped under the stars, Wyatt told his children the whole story. How their mother had come to his door wounded and carrying a map. How he had chosen to help her instead of chasing the gold for himself. How they had fallen in love despite the danger and uncertainty. "Why did you not take half the gold?" Samuel asked. "You could have been rich." "I am rich," Wyatt said, looking at Violet and then at each of his children in turn. "I have everything that matters." "But you could have had both," Grace pointed out with her usual practical logic. "The gold and mother." "Maybe," Wyatt said, "but the gold did not matter to me. Your mother did, and I did not want our relationship to start with me taking something from her. I wanted her to choose me because of who I was, not because she felt obligated." "And I did choose him," Violet said, smiling at her husband. "Every day since then I have chosen him, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Thomas, the youngest, looked thoughtful. "So the gold was not important. The gold changed our lives," Violet said. "It gave us security and opportunity, but it was not what made us happy. Love did that. Family did that. Building a life together did that." The children absorbed this lesson, and Wyatt hoped they would remember it when they were older and faced with their own difficult choices. The world was full of glittering distractions, things that promised happiness but delivered only emptiness. He wanted his children to know the difference, to understand that real wealth was measured in relationships and experiences, not dollars and gold. They returned to the ranch a week later, sunburned and tired but filled with stories and memories. Life resumed its normal pace, and the months turned into years. Samuel married his sweetheart and took over more of the ranch operations. Grace went to school in Rapid City and came back with ideas for expanding their business. Thomas proved to be a gifted horseman and started earning a reputation as a trainer. Wyatt and Violet gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, content to let their children take the lead. They spent more time together, taking long rides across the grasslands, sitting on the porch in the evenings, and simply enjoying each other's company. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Samuel and his wife brought their 2 young children, and the house was filled with noise and laughter and love. After dinner, Samuel stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us that the best things in life cannot be bought or sold. who showed us what real love looks like, who built something lasting from courage and faith and hard work. We are all here because 25 years ago, two people found each other against impossible odds and chose to build a life together. To mother and father. To mother and father, everyone echoed, and Wyatt felt tears prickling his eyes. Later that night, alone in their room, Violet said, "We did well, did we not? With the children, the ranch, all of it. We did better than well," Wyatt said. "We created something beautiful. I could not have done it without you. And I could not have done it without you. We are a team, Violet. Always have been, always will be." She kissed him then, and it was as sweet and full of promise as their first kiss had been all those years ago in the canyon. Time had changed their bodies, adding gray to their hair and lines to their faces, but it had not diminished their love. If anything, it had deepened it, adding layers of shared history and weathered storms. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost friends to illness and accident, saw their children's children born and grow, and weathered economic downturns and harsh winters. But through it all, Wyatt and Violet stood together, their love the bedrock upon which everything else was built. When Wyatt turned 60 in 1908, the family threw a surprise party that brought people from all over the county. Tom Reeves, now retired as marshal but still spry at 65, made the trip from White River and regaled everyone with stories of the day he had saved Wyatt and Violet from the Garrett brothers. "I knew from the moment I saw you two together that you were meant for each other," Tom said, clapping Wyatt on the shoulder. "Best decision I ever made was organizing that rescue." "Best decision I ever made was opening my door," Wyatt replied. "Everything good in my life came from that moment." As the party wound down and guests departed, Wyatt and Violet found themselves alone on the porch once more, their favorite place in the world. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to their decades of work. The house glowed with lamplight, and they could hear their children and grandchildren inside, still talking and laughing. "We have had a good life," Violet said softly. "The best," Wyatt agreed. "You have any regrets?" Wyatt thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "None. Every choice I made led me here to this moment with you. How could I regret any of it?" "I am glad," Violet said, "because I have no regrets either. Even the bullet wound, even the Garrett brothers, even the fear and danger, it was all worth it to end up here with you." They sat together as the stars came out, as they had done thousands of times before. And as Wyatt held his wife's hand and felt the solid weight of her presence beside him, he thought about that August evening 30 years ago when a wounded woman had knocked on his door. He had been faced with a choice then: pursue gold or save a life. It had not been a difficult decision, not really. Gold was cold and lifeless, worth only what others agreed to pay for it. But a human life, a chance to help someone in need, that was priceless. And the fact that helping Violet had led to love and family and a lifetime of happiness, that was a bonus he had never expected but would treasure forever. The world had changed dramatically since 1878. The Wild West was no longer wild, the open ranges were fenced, and the frontier had given way to civilization. But some things remained constant: the love between a man and a woman, the bond of family, the satisfaction of building something lasting. As Wyatt sat with Violet on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the legacy they had created, he knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice all those years ago. Gold could wait. Gold could always wait. But love, real love, could not. And he had been blessed beyond measure to recognize that truth and act on it. "I love you," he said to Violet, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you too," she replied, as she always did. "Forever." "Forever," Wyatt echoed and meant it with every fiber of his being. The night deepened around them, peaceful and perfect, and Wyatt Sullivan knew that no matter what tomorrow brought, he had everything he needed right here, right now. He had chosen love over gold, and that choice had given him the richest life imaginable. It was a lesson he would carry with him until his last breath, and one he hoped would be passed down through generations. That the things which truly matter cannot be dug from the earth or bought with money, but can only be found in the hearts of those we love. And so they sat together, Wyatt and Violet, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that was worth more than all the gold in the Black Hills. Their story had begun with a knock on a door and a choice to put life before fortune, and it would end decades later with their children and grandchildren gathered around, carrying forward the values they had embodied. But that ending was still years away. For now, there was only the present moment, the feel of Violet's hand in his, the sound of family inside, and the vast Dakota sky above. It was enough. It was everything. And Wyatt would not have changed a single moment of the journey that had brought them here. The ranch continued to prosper in the years that followed, becoming one of the most respected horse operations in South Dakota. Samuel proved to be a skilled manager, combining his father's instinct for horses with his mother's business acumen. Grace married a banker from Rapid City and helped secure favorable terms for expanding the ranch's breeding program. Thomas never married but poured his heart into the horses, developing training techniques that were studied and copied throughout the territory. Wyatt and Violet moved into a smaller house on the property, content to let their children run the day-to-day operations. They spent their time tending a garden, receiving visits from grandchildren, and simply enjoying the peace they had earned. Every evening, weather permitting, they sat on their porch and watched the sunset, holding hands and reflecting on the extraordinary ordinary life they had built together. In the spring of 1915, as Wyatt approached his 67th birthday, he and Violet celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. The family gathered once more, now including great-grandchildren who ran and played with the same energy their grandparents had once possessed. There was music and dancing and food, and when someone asked Wyatt to say a few words, he stood with Violet at his side and looked out at the faces of the people they had brought into the world, directly or indirectly. "When I was 30 years old," he began, "I was living alone in a cabin, thinking I had found contentment in solitude. And then one evening a woman came to my door with a map and a bullet wound, and everything changed. She offered me gold, but I chose her instead. And that choice gave me all of this." He gestured at the assembled family. "Every person here exists because of that choice, because I decided that gold can wait, but people cannot." He looked down at Violet, who was smiling up at him with tears in her eyes. "I have never regretted that decision. Not once in 37 years. This woman gave me everything worth having: love, family, purpose, and joy. She is the treasure I found in the wilderness, worth more than all the gold ever pulled from the earth. And I will love her until my last breath and beyond." The family erupted in applause, and Wyatt sat down, pulling Violet close. She whispered in his ear, "You old romantic, you made me cry." "Good tears?" he asked. "The best tears," she confirmed, kissing his weathered cheek. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, and the family gradually departed for their own homes, Wyatt and Violet made their way to their small house. They moved more slowly than they once had, their joints stiff and their steps careful, but they moved together as they always had. Inside, Wyatt built a fire against the evening chill while Violet made tea. They settled into their chairs with quilts across their laps and sipped the hot liquid content in the silence that came from decades of companionship. "You think," Violet said eventually, "that we have done enough? Made enough of a difference? Look at our family," Wyatt replied. "Look at the ranch, the legacy we are leaving. Look at the lives we have touched and the love we have shared. I think we have done more than enough. I think we have done something remarkable." "I just want to matter," Violet said softly. "I want our story to mean something." "It does," Wyatt assured her. "It means everything. We took the worst thing that ever happened to you, that bullet wound, and turned it into something beautiful. We proved that kindness matters, that choosing people over profit matters, that love is the most valuable thing in this world. If that is not enough, I do not know what is." Violet nodded, satisfied. They finished their tea in comfortable silence, then made their way to bed. As they lay together in the darkness, Violet said, "Promise me something." "Anything," Wyatt replied. "Promise me that when I am gone, you will not spend your days grieving. I want you to remember the joy we had, not mourn what is lost." "You are not going anywhere," Wyatt said firmly. "We are going to live to be 100, both of us. Promise me anyway." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, then said, "I promise to try, but you have to promise me the same thing. If I go first, you keep living. You keep loving our family and tending your garden and watching the sunsets. You do not let grief consume you." "I promise," Violet whispered, and they sealed the promises with a kiss that was tender and true. The years continued their relentless march. Wyatt and Violet celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. They became fixtures in the community. The old couple who had built an empire from nothing and whose love story was told and retold as an example of what devotion looked like. Young couples would sometimes ride out to their house to ask for advice, and Wyatt and Violet always welcomed them, sharing the wisdom they had accumulated over 5 decades together. "Choose each other every day," Violet would tell them. "Not just on your wedding day, but every morning when you wake up. Choose to love, choose to forgive, choose to build something together. And remember that things do not matter," Wyatt would add. "Money does not matter. Stuff does not matter. What matters is the person beside you and the life you create together. Everything else is just noise." In the winter of 1923, when Wyatt was 75 and Violet 71, Violet caught pneumonia. The family gathered, fearing the worst, but she rallied with the same stubborn determination that had kept her alive after the bullet wound all those years ago. As she recovered, lying in bed with Wyatt holding her hand, she said, "I am not ready to go yet. I still have too much living to do." "Then you will live," Wyatt said firmly, "because I am not ready to let you go." And she did live, recovering fully and returning to her routine. But the scare had reminded them both that time was finite, that their years together, however many remained, were precious and should not be wasted. They made a point after that to be more intentional about everything. They took walks every day, weather permitting, exploring the land they had lived on for decades, as if seeing it for the first time. They had long conversations about everything and nothing, making sure to say the things that mattered while there was still time. They wrote letters to each of their children and grandchildren, pouring out their hearts and sharing the lessons they had learned about love and life, and what it meant to build something lasting. On their 50th anniversary in 1928, the family threw an enormous celebration that drew people from across South Dakota and beyond. The ranch was decorated with ribbons and flowers, and a tent was set up for the dinner and dancing. Wyatt and Violet, now both showing the marks of age but still clearly devoted to each other, sat in places of honor while the party swirled around them. Samuel, now 51 and gray at the temples, stood to give a toast. "My parents have been married for 50 years," he said. "Half a century of love and partnership and dedication. They have shown us all what it means to commit to another person, to choose them over and over again no matter what life brings. They are the foundation upon which this entire family is built, and we are all blessed to be part of their legacy." To Wyatt and Violet Sullivan, the greatest love story South Dakota has ever known. The toast was met with cheers and applause, and Wyatt rose slowly to his feet, helping Violet stand beside him. They looked out at the assembled crowd, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore their legacy, and Wyatt felt his heart swell with gratitude. "50 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I made the best decision of my life. I chose love over gold. I chose a wounded woman over a fortune. And that choice gave me everything you see here today. It gave me Violet, who is the light of my life and the reason I wake up every morning. It gave me our children, who have built on what we started and made it even better. It gave me all of you, this incredible family that stretches across generations. I could not have asked for more. I could not have imagined this much happiness. And it all started because I opened my door to someone who needed help and chose to put her life before anything else. That is the lesson I want to leave you all with. People matter more than anything. Love matters more than anything. And if you remember that, if you let that guide your choices, you will never go wrong." He sat down to thunderous applause, and Violet leaned over to kiss him. "That was perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect," he replied. As the party continued into the night, Wyatt and Violet slipped away from the crowd and made their way to their favorite spot. The porch of the original cabin, which still stood at the edge of the property, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. They sat on the bench Wyatt had built so many years ago, now worn smooth by decades of use, and looked out at the stars. "I never imagined," Violet said, "that when I knocked on that door, I was knocking on the door to my future, to everything I would ever want or need. I never imagined that opening it would change my entire life," Wyatt replied. "But I am so glad I did. I am so glad you came to me. I am so glad for every moment we have had together." "Do you think we will have many more?" Violet asked, and there was a tremor in her voice that spoke of her fears. "I think we will have exactly as many as we are supposed to have," Wyatt said. "And I will treasure every single one. But even if tonight were our last night, I would have no complaints. We have had more than most people ever dream of. We have had a lifetime of love." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something that would outlast them both. Their story would be told for generations, passed down as a testament to the power of choosing people over possessions, love over gold, and kindness over selfishness. And when the time finally came, years later, for them to leave this world, they would do so knowing that they had lived fully, loved completely, and left behind a legacy that would endure. But that was still in the future. For now, there was just this moment, this perfect evening, and the two of them together, as they always had been and always would be. Wyatt and Violet Sullivan had lived their great love story, and it had exceeded every expectation. From a knock on a door to a lifetime together, they had proved that the best treasures in life are not found in the ground but in the hearts of those we choose to love. And that was a lesson worth more than all the gold in the world.